Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten introduced a revolutionary new sun-worshipping religion to ancient Egypt. Along with his wife Nefertiti, he controversially attempted to transform Egyptian religion, art and governance. Writer and researcher Ralph Ellis put forward the theory that Adam and Eve were real people. He believes that the Garden of Eden was actually located at Amarna in Egypt, that Adam was the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, and that Nefertiti, the great royal wife of Akhenaten, was Eve. Amarna was finally destroyed, as was the Garden of Eden, and the royal couple were forced to flee to the wider world outside their comfortable existence, as Adam and Eve were in the biblical story. Akhenaten, also Amenhotep IV, was an 18th dynasty king of ancient Egypt. He ruled from 1353 to 1336 BCE and established a new cult dedicated to the Aten, the sun's disk. Hence he assumed the name Akhenaten, meaning beneficial to Aten. Shortly after becoming Pharaoh, Amenhotep IV seems to have married the main queen of his reign, Nefertiti. Nefertiti's parentage is somewhat of a mystery, but as her name translates, a beautiful woman has come. Some early researchers believe that she was a princess from abroad, perhaps from Mitanni, Syria. However, Egyptologists now think that she was the Egyptian-born daughter of the courtier Ai, brother of Akhenaten's mother, Tai. The earliest monuments associated with the reign of Amenhotep depict the traditional worship of deities depicted in the artistic style of the preceding reign, with one interesting exception. That is, the central role given to the falcon-headed god, who is given an unusual description containing the phrase, "who rejoices in his horizon, in his aspect of the light, which is the sun's disk." In the 5th year of his reign, the king changed his name to Amenhotep. Amen is content, to Akhenaten, beneficial to Aten. Akhenaten's grandfather, Thutmose IV, had already hinted at what was to come for ancient Egypt, with a new emphasis on the worship of the sun disk Aten, and his father had nurtured this by cultivating the cult of the sun. Within the first few years of his own rule, Amenhotep IV introduced sweeping changes to the spheres of religion, architecture and art. Akhenaten's changes to the artistic and religious life of ancient Egypt were sudden and revolutionary, though short-lived. His innovations were based upon a new religion centered on the worship of Aten, or the sun's disk, which Akhenaten raised above all other gods in the Egyptian pantheon. Akhenaten built several new temples dedicated to Re-Harekte, near the main precinct of the god's Amen at Karnak, who was now given an extensive description placed in 2 royal cartouches and was defined as the light which is in the sun's disk, Aten. Importantly, the new god Aten was no longer depicted in anthropomorphic form, but as the sun's disk itself, lifted up to the heavens and pouring its manifold rays down over the royal family. At some stage in his 5th year of reign, Akhenaten introduced a program to expunge the image of the Theban god Ammon from all monuments, a move that caused widespread destruction to many Egyptian temples. Why he did this is still a mystery. At some point it appears that other gods were attacked as well, including Ammon's consort, Mut. In honor of the Aten, Akhenaten constructed an entirely new capital at a previously uninhabited place in the middle of the desert, which is now called Amarna. Dominic Montserrat wrote in his book Akhenaten, History, Fantasy and Ancient Egypt, "East of Amarna, the sun rises in a break in the surrounding cliffs. In this landscape, the sunrise could literally read as if it were the hieroglyphic spelling Akhenaten, or Horizon of the Aten, the name of the new city." Although Akhenaten had been considered by some researchers as the world's first monotheist, the religion of the Aten would be more accurately described as monolatry, that is, the worship of one god in preference to all others. It's unclear whether his beliefs ever captured the public imagination completely, as private homes, as well as the workmen's village, have produced many figurines of household deities, and stele dedicated to traditional deities, such as Isis and Torsret, have been discovered in a number of private chapels. Towards the end of Akhenaten's reign, he's mysteriously depicted on some monuments together with another king whose personal name was Nefer-Neferuaten, the initial element of Queen Nefertiti's own name. Whether this enigmatic person was a new male co-regent whose origin is now lost, or whether, as it seems more likely, it is Nefertiti herself elevated to the status of male pharaoh, remains a contentious issue. Akhenaten's final years are shrouded in mystery. After his death around 1335 BC, his radical upheavals in religion and art and his new capital did not survive. Within a few years, a new king named Tutankhamun, whom a number of researchers now believe to have been Akhenaten's son, ascended the throne. In his 2004 book Eden in Egypt, Adam and Eve were Akhenaten and Nefertiti, author and researcher Ralph Ellis claimed that the controversial Egyptian pharaoh and his wife were the biblical Adam and Eve. In his work, Ellis states that the parable of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden was based on real people and historical events. Ellis points out a number of parallels between the biblical account and the lives of Akhenaten and Nefertiti and the history and geography of Amarna. The Bible mentions a river which flowed through the Garden of Eden and then split into 4 branches. The only river in the Near East that answers this description is the Nile, with its original division into 4 branches of the Nile Delta. Ellis maintains that the Genesis story is actually a refined version of Akhenaten's hymn to the Aten. So, the Garden of Eden was originally the Garden of Aten, and it lived at Amarna in Middle Egypt. He believes it probable that the hymn to the Aten was sung to greet the dawn, the beginning of each new day, and later this practice was confused with the story of the beginning of all creation. In the book, Ellis also contends that Hebrew is a direct descendant of the ancient Egyptian language, and that the Bible was originally written in Egyptian. If this were the case, he reasons, it follows that large parts of the Old Testament were based upon very ancient Egyptian lore, stories, and morality tales. As the Israelites originally came from Egypt, it's perfectly natural that their language, their culture, and many of their gods were of an Egyptian nature. In the Bible, Adam and Eve are described as the first man and woman. Ellis links this with the fact that the pharaoh Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti were also the first man and woman in terms, being the most important 2 people in the country, just as the American president and his wife are known as the first man and the first lady nowadays. Ellis's conclusion in his controversial book is therefore that the entire Genesis story is based on the singular events of the Amarna era, when Egypt's heretic pharaoh and his wife were banished to the barren plain on the east bank of the Nile. He also believes that the fact that the tombs of Akhenaten and Nefertiti have never been discovered at Amarna lends proof to his theories. Archaeologists, however, believe her tomb is located in the Valley of the Kings and will one day be discovered. In February 2020, it was announced that a radar survey around the tomb of Tutankhamun's in Egypt's Valley of the Kings had revealed possible evidence of further hidden chambers behind its walls. The discoveries were made by researchers led by archaeologist and former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities. The results of the survey are believed by some to lend support to the theory that the young king's burial place hides the existence of a larger tomb which could well contain the remains of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti. There is a related story to that of Ellis, which contends that the alleged monotheism of Akhenaten later influences Moses and the subsequent birth of Israelite monotheism. This is perhaps not so far-fetched, as a number of writers and historians have looked for the identity of biblical Moses among the royal families of ancient Egypt. The Bible does make it clear, after all, that he grew up in the royal household. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was the first to suggest a link between the apparently monotheistic beliefs of the pharaoh Akhenaten and the monotheistic religions of the world today. In his book, Moses and Monotheism, published in England in 1939, he suggested that Moses may in fact have been a follower of Akhenaten and perhaps served at his court. Archaeologist and author Brian Fagan, however, believes that they are 2 different kinds of monotheisms and that there's probably no link between the 2. He says Israelite monotheism developed through centuries of discussion, declarations of faith and interactions with other societies and other beliefs. In contrast, Akhenaten's monotheism developed very largely at the behest of a single, absolute monarch presiding over an isolated land, where the pharaoh's word was divine and secular law. It was an experiment that withered on the vine. According to a reading from a newly digitized fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Noah's Ark was something different than what is currently believed. The 2,000-year-old text may be proof that the Ark was the shape of a pyramid. Over 50 years ago, a stone thrown by a Bedouin shepherd into a cave led to what some have called the greatest archaeological discovery of the 21st century. The Bedouin heard the stone crack open an earthenware jar. Upon investigating, he found the first of what came to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. When all of the scrolls and fragments were sorted out, they accounted for about 800 manuscripts. About 1/4, or just over 200 manuscripts, are copies of portions of the Hebrew Bible text. Now, after almost 5 years, a laboratory established by the Israel Antiquities Authority as part of the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library project has scanned tens of thousands of fragments from the scrolls with a custom-made camera. Each fragment was photographed 28 times at high resolution using different wavelengths of light. The sophisticated technology enabled researchers to read letters and words that were previously illegible. Some of the newly digitized fragments offered new interpretations of well-known biblical stories. Haaretz reported that the new reading of the fragments has changed our understanding about Noah's Ark. Thanks to the high-resolution imagery, a word following the phrase "the Ark's tallness" had previously been illegible. However, the new scans showed that the correct words mean "gathered," which according to researcher Alexei Yuditsky mean that the Ark's ribs were gathered together at the top in the shape of a pyramid. The doctor said that a Greek translation of the Bible dating to the 3rd century BC used a Greek verb with a similar meaning to describe the Ark. Moreover, medieval authors suggested that the Ark's roof was pointed. The newly deciphered words on the ancient parchments stayed hidden for centuries, but are now bringing answers to many long-standing questions, as well as raising new ones. Previously, the story of Noah's Ark was known mainly from the Book of Genesis. However, the Dead Sea Scrolls found in the Qumran cave in the Judean desert shed new light on this story. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain information about many controversial and fascinating topics from the past, the story of Noah and the legendary flood being just one of them. Guest author of Ancient Origins explained in his articles Evidence of the Great Flood, Real or Myth, that the story of Noah is not just a biblical account. He said, the story of a great flood sent by God, or gods according to much earlier testimony, to destroy humanity for its sins is a widespread account shared by many religions and cultures around the world, and dates back to our earliest recorded history from India to ancient Greece. Mesopotamia and even North American Indian tribes, there is no shortage of such tales that often enough sound very much alike. Some of these stories truly sound so similar that one could wonder whether all cultures around the planet had experienced such an event. Only after 7000 BC, when the ocean levels finally began stabilizing, human life once more began to return to normal. Coastal sites no longer had to be abandoned for higher ground, at least for the most part, and between 6000 and 5000 BC, once more we began to see signs of human activity closer to the sea. Is it a mere coincidence that our recorded history happens to start around this time? Is it true that early humans were too primitive to leave traces of their existence behind, or all the early pages of our history were washed away by the great flood of the last ice age? After all, it seems that as soon as the adverse climatic conditions receded, it didn't take long for humans to thrive once again. Another discovery resulting from the digitization is connected with two fragments that shed light on a puzzling word in the Bible. Chapter 39 of Genesis describes how Judah had sex with his daughter-in-law Tamar, She disguised herself as a prostitute, and as a guarantee of payment, she received his signet, staff, and till. After many centuries of debate regarding the meaning of the word till, the Dead Sea Scrolls have finally given the answer with the following sentence: till is his belt. As Moshe Bar Asher, the Academy president, said, "The word till is mentioned in the Bible 10 times. In every place, we know what it is and what its function is, except for the till Tamar received. On this, our ancestors were divided, but now we have an early text from the 1st century as the latest, which gives the meaning of this till. It's the belt with which he tied his trousers or his robe." Despite decades of study and analysis, the Dead Sea Scrolls are still giving up their secrets. Researchers from the Haifa University have reconstructed the contents of one of the last 2 undeciphered Dead Sea Scrolls, disclosing a distinctive calendar used by a Jewish sect that lived in the Judean desert during the Second Temple period. 60 small fragments were pieced together over a period of 12 months, identifying the name of a festival marking the changes between seasons. It also revealed a second scribe corrected mistakes made by the original author, as BBC had reported. The collection is considered to be the oldest copy of the Hebrew Bible ever found, dating it to at least the 4th century BC. Tens of thousands of fragments belonging to over 900 scrolls were found in the caves at Qumran. Dr. Eshbal Ratson from the Bible department at Haifa University told Haaretz, and adds, "This is the most important archaeological find ever made in Israel. This is literature from the Second Temple period, and that's rare. It's not known who wrote the scrolls, even though several historians have suggested that the writers were a desert sect called the Essenes. They describe they were assisted in deciphering the codes by annotations discovered in the margins by a scribe correcting omissions made by the author." Dr. Ratson explained that it took decades that involved many scientists and researchers to piece the fragments together, decrypt them, and then publish their contents. Still, 2 of them remained undeciphered. The scrolls are written in 3 languages, Hebrew for the most part, Aramaic, while a few of them are written in Greek. The scroll Dr. Ratson worked on with Professor Jonathan Bedov, also from the Bible department at Haifa University, was written in coded Hebrew, and some of the fragments were smaller than 1 square centimeter. Very few scrolls that had previously been deciphered were written in this language, she says via Haaretz. The 2 experts noticed a unique 364-day calendar, which was already known to researchers and differs significantly from the one Jews used at the period. Most Jews used a calendar that is similar to the one used today. The sect used a calendar that is almost based on a solar year, comprising 364 days. There are months with 30 or 31 days in every season, Dr. Ranson stated via Haaretz, and adds, 364 divided into 7, so every date falls on a specific day of the week and every holiday has a fixed date. We know that in the temple there were disputes between different sects over what happens if Passover falls on Shabbat. What supersedes what, Shabbat or the holiday? This sect solved the problem, since no holiday fell on Shabbat. This scroll details all dates on which Shabbat falls and all the days of the week on which holidays fall. Dr. Ratson also explained that when significant events took place inside a temple, such as the high priest making a sacrifice on Yom Kippur, only 1 calendar could be used. But this calendar was disputed, which may be one of the reasons this sect left the temple and went into the desert. They had many disputes, and this was one of them. They couldn't celebrate holidays together. The Tekufa. Furthermore, the researchers also noticed the name used by the sect for a festival commemorated 4 times a year that marked the transition between the seasons, the Tekufa. The same word in modern-day Hebrew means period. This shows us that the researchers who believed the day of celebrating the transition between the seasons was called by this name were correct, and that this word, as used in the Mishnah, was preserved from the days of the Second Temple. It's a very early concept in halakha, religious Jewish law. Dr. Razan stated via Haaretz, adding that the unique calendar also refers to annual wine and olive harvest festivals no longer observed in Judaism. Meanwhile, a research team is currently excavating a 12th cave that might hide further scrolls to be deciphered. The cave was discovered last year, and only one blank scroll was found at that time. Details of what has been discovered by the team from Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, are due to be revealed soon. Mount Sinai is renowned as the principal site of divine revelation in Jewish history, where God is purported to have appeared to Moses and given him the Ten Commandments. Biblical scholars believe Mount Sinai may have been either in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt or at Har Karkom, a mountain ridge in the Negev Desert of southern Israel. A more recent and controversial theory suggests that Mount Sinai could be in Saudi Arabia, where Moses was thought to have fled after escaping Egypt. Mount Sinai, also called the Mountain of Moses, is renowned as the principal site of divine revelation in Jewish history, where in the Bible, God is purported to have appeared to Moses and given him the Ten Commandments. Exodus 19 says, "The people all responded together, 'We will do everything the Lord has said.' So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, 'I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you.' Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said, and the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not go up the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death.'" According to Jewish tradition, not only were the Ten Commandments revealed to Moses on Sinai, but also the entire corpus of biblical text and interpretation. Mount Sinai is revered by Christians, Muslims, and Jews, all of whom believe that God delivered his Ten Commandments to Moses at its summit. Because biblical scholars have differing opinions as to what route the Israelite exodus took out of Egypt, and the fact that the biblical place names cannot be matched to present locations, it's extremely difficult to make a positive identification of the biblical Mount Sinai. The main contender for the biblical Mount Sinai is known locally as Gebel or Jebel Musa, Arabic for the Mountain of Moses. The mountain rises to 7,498 feet in elevation and is located in Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula, a triangular peninsula linking Africa with Asia and occupying an area of 23,500 square miles. The mountain has become an important pilgrim and tourist site. In the early Christian period, the area was inhabited by hermits, and in 530 AD, the monastery of St. Catherine was built at the northern foot of the mountain, the traditional site of the burning bush observed by Moses. The Greek Orthodox monastery is named after a saint who was martyred in Egypt in AD 307, and is said to possess a library with the most important collection of manuscripts in the world outside the Vatican. The incredible collection includes 3,500 manuscripts and 2,000 scrolls. The majority of these are in Greek and were copied by the monks at the monastery. In 1844, the German scholar Friedrich von Tischendorf discovered one of the earliest copies of the Bible here, dating to the 4th century AD. Incredibly, St. Catherine still retains its original appearance and has had an unbroken history since the 6th century. The original grey granite walls, which measure 280 by 250 feet, are still standing, as is the church dedicated to the Virgin Mary, which dates to the same period. In 1975, workmen accidentally pierced a wall and discovered behind it a treasure trove of around 3,000 more manuscripts, including ancient biblical texts and other documents which were thought to have been lost centuries before, along with various works of art. Among the find were missing parts of the Codex Sinaiticus, some 50 other incomplete codexes, and 10 nearly complete ones, and other Greek texts, that shed new light on the history of Greek writing. An even larger number of documents were found which were written in various Semitic, Afro-Asiatic and Indo-European languages dating from the 6th century and earlier. The other main contender for the biblical Mount Sinai is known as Har Karkom in the southwest Negev desert region of Israel. Har means mountain, and Karkom is derived from the ancient Perusian Karkum, which refers to the saffron-producing crocus flower and means yellow. Italian archaeologist Emanuele Annati believes that this mountain fits the biblical account in Exodus chapter 4, in which Moses, having accepted his task from God, left Midian to return to Egypt. According to Annati, that means that, according to the biblical view, the way from Midian to Egypt crosses Mount Sinai. Looking at the geographical map, with the Bible in one hand, Har Karkom is the only locality among those proposed for Mount Sinai which fits without any effort all these coordinates. It's also the only mountain that has recorded archaeological evidence of the cult role it had in the Bronze Age. Annati's excavations on the mountain reveal that it was an important cult center which began life in the Paleolithic period 20,000 years ago. The archaeological investigations at the site found the surrounding plateau dotted with shrines, altars, stone circles, stone pillars, and more than 40,000 rock engravings. Another researcher whose ideas have contributed to Har Karkom's case is Dr. Haim Berger. He recorded a phenomenon on the mountain that occurs during the winter solstice and which can be observed only when standing on a certain spot at midday. He noted that a bright light which shone from the cliff in front of him at a distance of about 650 feet. This bright light is caused by sunlight illuminating a limestone cave through a hidden aperture in its roof. But in ancient times, this may have not been understood, and could, reasons Berger, account for the biblical story of the burning bush. But there have been many objections to the theory that Har Karkom is the biblical Mount Sinai. The peak of religious activity at the site probably dates to 2350 to 2000 BC, and the mountain seems to have been abandoned between 1950 and 1000 BC. As the biblical Exodus is usually dated between 1600 to 1200 BC, it means that Annati's theory does not hold water. One of the most recent theories regarding Mount Sinai is that it lies in Saudi Arabia. The idea was originally proposed by American adventurer Ron Wyatt, and much of the evidence in favor of it was collected together in the film Finding the Mountain of Moses, the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, released by the Doubting Thomas Research Foundation. The film identifies Jabal Makla, the Burnt Mountain, a mountain located in northwest Saudi Arabia near the Jordan border above the Gulf of Aqaba, as Mount Sinai. In the film, the Foundation links various sites on the mountain with locations mentioned in the Bible. However, the majority of biblical scholars argue firmly against this hypothesis, saying there's no evidence whatsoever in the Bible which would support it. Another linked theory states that Mount Sinai was a volcanic peak located in Saudi Arabia. Proponents for this idea point to the lines in the Bible which appear to support their theory. Exodus 19:16 states, "On the morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled." While Exodus 20:18 says, "When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance." Such descriptions have led some investigators to theorize that the mountain was a volcano, and the only area in the region possibly meeting this requirement are the lava fields, Hara, in northwest Arabia. In fact, this idea goes all the way back to a British explorer and Bible scholar, Charles T. Beckey, who published the pamphlet Mount Sinai, a Volcano in 1873. Beckey worked out that the mountain should be located along the route that Moses supposedly took on his return to Egypt from Midian in northwest Arabia. Therefore, he focused on the mountains at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba, mainly Mount Bagir, Mount Sheikh Mohammed Bagir, or Jabal al-Nur, Mountain of Light. However, when Becky visited his proposed location for Mount Sinai, he discovered that it was not in fact a volcanic and withdrew his theory. More recently, other researchers have revisited the volcanic mountain theory. However, as many scholars have pointed out, there is a huge hole in the idea. How could people have survived unharmed in close proximity to an active volcano? The tephra fallout from volcanic plumes alone is extremely hazardous and often deadly to man, animals, and vegetation. Human activity on such a mountain would surely not be possible. So Moses would certainly have not been able to spend 80 days in its heights, as the Bible says. The Magi are familiar to most people as the wise men from the east in the Bible. The Gospel of Matthew describes them following the Star of Bethlehem to find the Saviour and offering him their gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh. But did these mysterious wise men bearing exotic gifts really exist outside of this biblical story? And if so, what was the Star of Bethlehem which they followed? Some researchers suggest it was not a star at all, but either the planet Jupiter or the conjunction of Jupiter with two other planets, Saturn and Mars. The word Magi, the plural of the term Magnus, comes from Latin via the Greek word magoi, itself borrowed from Old Persian magus. The Old English word is maj, and it is from this that we get our word magic. One of the earliest mentions of the Magi is by the 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus, who states that they were a sacred class of priests living in Media, roughly the northwestern part of modern-day Iran and the area of Kurdistan. It's recorded that when Darius the Great, Persian emperor from 521 to 486 BC, discovered that the Magi at the Median court were skilled interpreters of dreams, he established them in preference to the state religion of Persia. Whatever the truth of this, by the time Herodotus was writing, the Magi had become priests in the Persian Zoroastrian religion with a role comparable to shamans or medicine men. Part of their duties was to serve as astrological consultants to the Persian emperors, and they soon attained a powerful religious influence and respect as wise men throughout the empire. The ancient Greek writer and geographer Strabo described the Magi in Cappadocia, now central Turkey. He called them fire kindlers, who possessed fire temples containing an altar on which a fire was kept continuously burning. The Magi visited the temple daily for around an hour, where they would make incantations holding bundles of tamarisk or other branches in front of the fire and wearing round their heads high turbans of felt, which reached down their cheeks far enough to cover their lips. It seems that some Magi also travelled west, arriving and settling in Greece and Italy. Traces of their beliefs and practices can be found in Mithraism, an ancient mystery religion based on worship of the god Mithras, which became popular among the Roman legions around the 3rd to 4th centuries AD. At the time of the Roman Empire, the word magi began to be used as a more general term to describe any representatives of an Eastern cult, and by the time of the birth of Jesus, it had come to mean anyone involved in magic, astronomy, and dream interpretation. The Magi seem to have been accepted as part of the courts of the Roman Empire, as a number of them are mentioned as accompanying high-ranking officials and governors. The description of the Magi visiting Jesus in Bethlehem in the Gospel of Matthew, which was written between AD 60 and 80, is the only source we have for the event. Matthew, "There came wise men from the east to Jerusalem," and subsequently refers to the interest in stars, so it's probable the wise men he is speaking of were astrologers. This concern with the stars has suggested to some that the wise men came from Babylon, a well-known center of astrology at the time. However, to judge purely by the nature of the gifts they brought, gold, frankincense and myrrh, Arabia would seem more appropriate, though it didn't possess a Magian priesthood. Matthew doesn't specify how many were there, but the number of gifts would indicate 3. The nature of these gifts has potent symbolic power for Christians. Frankincense signifying Christ's divinity, gold representing his royalty, and myrrh, which was used in anointing corpses, a symbol of his forthcoming passion and death. According to Matthew, before arriving in Bethlehem, the Magi had first visited Herod, Roman puppet king of Judea, from around 30 BC. After sighting the star in the east, they had made inquiries with Herod regarding the new king. Herod, with his knowledge of the Old Testament prophecy, was able to direct them to Bethlehem. He requested that the Magi return to see him when they found any news of the Savior, so that he too could pay homage. As the Magi approached Bethlehem, the star again appeared in the sky, so they followed it until they found the King of Jews and presented him with their gifts. The astrologers were subsequently warned in a dream to avoid going back to Herod and so travel back to Persia by an alternative route. As a result of this trick, Herod was furious and ordered the massacre of the holy innocents, all the children under 2 years old in Bethlehem and the surrounding area. But by then, Joseph had taken Mary and Jesus to safety in Egypt. Over the years, there has been heated discussion about what kind of star it could have been that brought the Magi out of the east on their long trek to Judea. Explanations put forward for this astronomical wonder include meteors, the planet Venus, planetary conjunctions, stellar novae, comets, and even UFOs. The Greek word aster, used by Matthew in his Gospel to describe the Star of Bethlehem, can be interpreted to mean a comet. But is there any record of a comet at this time? In the Roman world, there was a belief that the appearance of a comet often heralded catastrophic political events and even the death of an emperor, which would suggest that it could not be associated with the birth of the new Messiah. But among the Magi of the Black Sea coast of Turkey, comets appear to have been good omens. The successful rule of one particular king in the area, Mithridates VI, was so much associated with comets as positive celestial portents that he even had coins minted depicting them. The appearance of Halley's Comet in 12 BC caused consternation throughout the Mediterranean world, especially in the skies above Rome. The idea that the Magi saw a nova or supernova explosion was first suggested by 17th century astronomer Johannes Kepler, and some researchers think it's a viable explanation for the Star of Bethlehem even today. Unfortunately, there is no Western record of such an event, and Chinese records only have one possible mention of a nova or supernova around the time of Jesus' birth. Crucially, there is also no known supernova remnant which would have been found if there had been a supernova at this time. In astronomy, a conjunction occurs when any two astronomical objects, such as asteroids, moons, planets, and stars, appear to be closely together in the sky, as observed from Earth. In his 1979 book, The Star of Bethlehem Mystery, English astronomer David Hughes suggested that planetary could explain the star that the Magi followed. Hughes wrote, "Witnesses saw the triple conjunction of Jupiter, the king of the planets, and Saturn, planet of justice, in Pisces, the zodiacal sign of the Jewish nation." In fact, there were 3 conjunctions at this time, though none of these were close enough that they'd appear as one object. Jupiter, known as the star of Zeus, was traditionally the planet associated with kings. An astronomer, Michael R. Molnar of Rutgers University in New Jersey, has interpreted statements in Matthew's Gospel that the star went before and stood over as referring to the reversal of motion and stationing of the planet Jupiter. Rutgers has discovered a Roman coin used in Antioch, the capital of Roman Syria, which dates to the time of Jesus' birth, and which depicts the astrological sign of Aries, the ram, turning its head to look back at a star. Rutgers believes that this coin was issued to commemorate the takeover of Judea by Roman Antioch in AD 6. Subsequent research revealed that in an important astrology work by Claudius Ptolemy, the Tetra Biblos, Aries the ram is explained as controlling the people of Judea, Idumea, Samaria, Palestine, and Coel Syria, all territories ruled by King Herod. So it's possible that the stars on the coin represent Judea's destiny in the hands of Roman Antioch. This may indicate that astrologers were waiting for the birth of a great king of the Jews, portended by the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem in the constellation of Aries the ram. Molnar's research shows that the celestial events on April the 17th, 6 BC, when Jupiter was in Aries and there was also a lunar eclipse of the planet, were exactly those which would indicate the birth of a divine person. Though a lot more research needs to be done on this theory, it provides the best evidence yet that the Magi from Persia were actually following a real star, in this case the royal star Jupiter, which would ultimately lead them to Bethlehem and the future king of the Jews. Recent research has found that an ancient cave near Beth HaKarim, west of Jerusalem, has close associations with John the Baptist. Seen by some as the greatest archaeological discoveries of the last 25 years, remains discovered in the cave suggest that it was being used for baptisms by John during the time of Jesus. Some biblical scholars disagree with this assertion, however, saying that the evidence for John the Baptist using the cave is circumstantial at best. St. John the Baptist was born sometime in the first decade BC in Judea, Palestine, near Jerusalem. The son of Zechariah, a Jewish priest of the order of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth. According to the New Testament, Elizabeth was a relative of Mary, the mother of Jesus. John was a Jewish prophet of priestly origin who preached the imminence of God's final judgment and baptized repented followers in preparation for it. He is revered by the Christian Church as the forerunner of Jesus Christ. After a period of solitude spent in the desert, John the Baptist appeared as a prophet in the region of the lower Jordan River Valley. He had a circle of disciples, and it's said that Jesus was among the recipients of his rite to baptism. St. John the Baptist was later imprisoned by Herod Antipas for denouncing Herod's marriage, which he said was illegal under Jewish law. According to scripture, Herod's stepdaughter Salome requested John's head to please her mother, Herodias. Around 30 AD, John was sentenced to death and subsequently beheaded by Herod Antipas. The primary sources for the details of the life of John the Baptist are the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Act of the Apostles and the 1st century AD Jewish historian Flavius Josephus's The Antiquities of the Jews. The ancient mountain village of Ein Karem is situated on the western slopes of Jerusalem, and Christian tradition holds that it was the birthplace of St. John the Baptist. The New Testament states that it was the place where both pregnant mothers of Jesus and John the Baptist met next to its spring. In subsequent years, monasteries and churches were built on the site and a rich village developed. It's believed that the area was the source of stones used to build the second Jewish temple, and according to numerous archaeological finds, the village was in existence prior to the Roman period. In 2004, a controversial book called The Cave of John the Baptist, written by Israeli archaeologist Shimon Gibson, was published. In this work, the author detailed work at the cave which he and his team had undertaken, which showed that the site was first occupied in the Iron Age from the 8th to the 6th century BC. Most significantly for the author, from the 1st to 3rd century AD, the cave seems to have had a cultic role, which continued as late as the 8th century. The cave, which is located in the side of a hill less than a mile from modern Suba, a small abandoned Arab village about 3 miles west of Ein Karem. Radiocarbon dating of the plaster in the cave, which had a broad entrance and internal staircase, revealed that the inhabited part of the cave was constructed between 700 and 500 BC. Outside the cave there was a pool which did not seem to have been for irrigation of the surrounding field. Gibson believed that the cave was originally an Iron Age ritual bath, due to the presence of the porch, large entrance and broad flight of stairs into the interior. Gibson interpreted the stone and pottery finds made within the cave, suggesting that it was used for foot-washing rites. He proposed that John the Baptist chose the cave at Suba near his hometown of Beth HaKarim, which already had an association with an ancient tradition of ritual bathing, as the place for his baptizing. Gibson was extremely confident with this identification, saying, I am now certain that this cave was connected with the ancient cult of John the Baptist. Indeed, this may well be the cave of the early years of John's life, the place where he sought his first solitude in the wilderness and the place where he practiced his baptisms. However, many biblical archaeologists and scholars agreed with Gibson's conclusions, believing that the argument linking the Suba cave to John the Baptist was difficult to prove and circumstantial. Gibson's claim that John the Baptist was veneered in the cave from Byzantine to Islamic times was based on the figure of a man carved on the wall high up in the cave. The figure, which is about 28 inches high, has no name attached to it, though Gibson believed the general similarity of the figure of John the Baptist as described in the Gospels is enough. However, there are no inscriptions or direct evidence to tie this figure to anyone from the Bible, let alone John the Baptist. Indeed, a number of scholars disagree with Gibson's conclusions, noting that the main claim to a John the Baptist connection was that the cave was used by followers of John the Baptist hundreds of years after his death in the Byzantine period 330 to 630 AD. Critics of Gibson's theory also pointed out that there were hundreds of similar caves in Israel with dubious biblical claims attached to them. Among the numerous examples visited by Byzantine pilgrims is the cave where Mary allegedly breastfed Jesus, the chapel of the Milk Grotto in Bethlehem. Indeed, pilgrims still visit and worship there to this day. In April 2006, it was announced that completed excavations at Suba Cave had revealed new features that deepen the mystery of the site's ancient origins and pointed to extensive use of the area's installations during the 7th century BC, around the time of Isaiah. Excavations also revealed the possible existence of a second, still unexcavated cave at the site, suggesting that the location could be a major religious complex during the Iron Age. In March 2016, Dr. James D. Tabor of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, one of the world's leading authorities on Second Temple period Judaism and early Christian origin, led a group to revisit Suba Cave. Tabor and Shimon Gibson had begun excavating the cave in 2006 and had called it at the time one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the last 25 years. Tabor described one of the most important discoveries of the excavations. As we dug down, we suddenly came across 1 meter to 1.5 meters filled with clearly 1st century AD period pottery shards, and this was out of a total of 4 meters of cultural layers in the cave. So, something was really going on in this cave during the early 1st century. We found evidence of thousands of clay vessels in the cave, all broken. Further seasons of excavations at the cave, which extended 90 feet into the hillside bedrock, uncovered a large plastered cave carved out of bedrock with steps leading into a large interior pool of water. The excavators believed this feature could have been a place for ritual immersion or baptism. In the 1st century AD, such a feature was normally characterized as the mikveh, a Jewish ritual bath. The Suba Cave is now considered to be the largest mikveh in Israel. Tabor and Gibson believe that the large amount of broken pottery vessels discovered at the site were connected to a baptism ritual conducted in the cave. Based partly on their research of 2nd century manuscripts, the pair suggests that baptism at the time of Jesus and John may have followed a set procedure that included not only immersion in the water, but also the pouring of water over the head with a pottery vessel, the anointing of the right foot, indicated by a foot-shaped cavity carved out of the bedrock near the steps close to the inside of the cave entrance, and the deliberate breaking of the vessel so it could never be used for practical purposes. The thousands of 1st century jug fragments uncovered in the cave were the remains of these ritual vessels. While Tabor and Gibson believe that the cave was used by John to baptize people during the time of Jesus, and possibly even Jesus himself, they admit that it was not initially made for this purpose. 5 years of excavation and research showed that the cave was initially created and used as a clay-making facility for the manufacture of pottery. As Tabor explained, the cave was first meant to be a water reservoir, fed by an adjacent spring which still exists for clay making. Pottery for the king's house was made at Zuba because the clay was so pure. Then it went out of use in the 2nd century BC and silted over. The site was later remodeled and converted into a ritual immersion facility during the 1st century AD. For years, there have been rumors that the Vatican holds mysterious truths about the life of Jesus and his lost years, which would drastically alter traditional belief. Some researchers believe Jesus spent these years visiting Britain with Joseph of Arimathea, while others believe he traveled to India. In the late 19th century, a Russian traveler claimed to have discovered such texts in a monastery in India, which, along with other documents, reveal that Jesus traveled to India and taught there and elsewhere in the East during his missing years. What is the truth of such claims? For many, what happened to Jesus when he seemed to disappear from the scriptures at 12 years old, only to re-emerge at about 30 to begin his ministry, is one of history's greatest mysteries. While Christian belief accepts that he spent these intervening years working as a carpenter in Galilee, there are in fact very few references to this in the Bible. The enigma of the 18 lost or hidden years in the life of Jesus has long been a point of heated debate amongst biblical scholars. Some do not believe this time gap to be of any consequence, and that even if any new information was discovered, it would not lead to anything of significance for the Christian faith. In other words, if it was important, it would have been included in the Bible. Other researchers, however, are of the opinion that if the whereabouts of Jesus during those years was revealed, it could well turn out to be the basis for understanding many of the enigmas surrounding Christianity. There are a number of competing theories for where Jesus was and what he was doing in these lost years. The two main explanations are either that he journeyed to India to study Hinduism and Buddhism, or that he traveled to Britain with Joseph of Arimathea, a tin trader who some say was his uncle. A lot of literature has been written about Jesus' supposed visit to Britain. In fact, it's a fairly ancient tradition. During the later Middle Ages, the legend of Joseph of Arimathea in Britain at Glastonbury, Somerset, was gradually built up, so that by the late 15th century, Glastonbury was touted as the birthplace of British Christianity, where Joseph erected the first church to house the Holy Grail. There was also a legend that Joseph had earlier visited Glastonbury along with a child Jesus, a tale which later inspired William Blake to compose the poem that became the words to the English hymn Jerusalem. The relevant part of Blake's verse goes, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green, and was the Holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen." By the late 15th century, there was a story circulating that Joseph had brought 2 silver flasks containing Christ's blood and sweat to Britain, and that these 2 relics were buried in his grave. This tale has shades of the legendary Holy Grail, though there is no record of any shrine marking the spot of the grave. Another variation on this theme mentions that Joseph buried the Holy Grail underneath Glastonbury Tor at the entrance to the underworld, after which a spring, now known as Chalice Well, began flowing and its water brought eternal youth to whoever drank it. Perhaps the most famous legend concerning Joseph of Arimathea and Glastonbury tells of him bringing the holy thorn to the town. According to one version of the story, Joseph is said to have sailed over the flooded Somerset levels to Glastonbury, where he planted his wooden staff in the ground. The staff then miraculously flowered into the Glastonbury thorn, a variety of the common hawthorn which flowers twice annually, once in spring and again around Christmas time. One theory still entertained today is that Joseph of Arimathea may have been a tin merchant who brought the young Jesus with him on a trading voyage to southwest Britain, mainly Cornwall, where tin was abundant. However, many researchers believe this story to be a relatively recent invention, originating with English author Reverend Sabine Baring-Gould, who introduced it in 1899 in his book of Cornwall. The legend of Jesus in Britain was added to a 1922 pamphlet by the Reverend Lionel Smithett Lewis, Vicar of St. John's at Glastonbury. Smithett Lewis was deeply interested in stories of Joseph and Amarathea's connection with Glastonbury and seems to have taken Baring-Gould's ideas of Joseph and the young Jesus trading for tin in Cornwall and moved it to Glastonbury. By the time it reached its final edition in 1955, the Reverend St. Joseph of Amarathea, or the Apostolistic Church of Britain, had expanded to around 200 pages and included a claim that Glastonbury was the burial place of the Virgin Mary. In 1894, a controversial book called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, written by a Russian-born resident of Paris called Nicholas Notovich, was published. The work made the astonishing claim that during the lost years of Jesus' life, he had visited India and trained as a Buddhist monk. In the book, Notovich told the story of his visit to India 7 years earlier, accompanying it with photographs of people and places he'd encountered. He gave an account explaining that during the trip he had broken his leg and was forced to convalesce in a remote monastery at Hemis in the highlands of Ladakh. While recovering there, Notovich was shown a strange document about which he'd already heard stories. It was written in a language of the Pali in 2 big volumes in cardboard covers with leaves yellowed by the lapse of time, as he described it. The text described the travels and studies in India of a man called Isa, who could have only been the biblical Jesus. Indeed, the document was entitled Life of Saint Isa, Best of the Sons of Men, Isa being the Arabic name of Jesus. According to the text, Jesus left Jerusalem at the age of 13 and set out towards Sind. Intending to improve and perfect himself in the divine understanding and to studying the laws of the great Buddha, he crossed Punjab and reached Puri Jagannath, where he studied the Vedas under Brahmin priests. He spent 6 years in Puri and Regra, near Nalanda, the ancient seat of Hindu learning. Then he went to the Himalayas and spent time in Tibetan monasteries studying Buddhism, and through Persia returned to Jerusalem at the age of 29. At the time, Notovich's book was a global publishing sensation, going through 11 French editions in its first year of publication alone. More than a century and a quarter later, however, Notovich's book is largely forgotten and its claims relegated to the realms of fantasy. But some researchers believe that this is doing a great disservice to Notovich and that his claims were based on real evidence, since lost, or perhaps now kept in the Vatican archives in Rome. However, even at the time Notovich's controversial writings, a number of people were far from convinced. German-born philologist and Oriental Max Muller stated that either the monks at the monastery had played a joke on Notovich, or he had invented the story and faked the ancient manuscript. Muller even wrote to the monastery where Notovich had allegedly stayed and was told by the head lama that there had been no Western visitor at the monastery in the past 15 years, and there were no ancient documents like the one described by Notovich. Shortly afterwards, English academic J. Archibald Douglas actually visited Hemis Monastery and interviewed the head lama, who stated definitively that Notovich had never been there. Both Muller and Douglas wrote articles refuting Notovich's claim that Jesus had traveled to India, and both were later published together in a book entitled Jesus Did Not Live in India, Proofs that Notovich's The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ was a fabrication. Notovich's case was not helped by the lack of any material evidence for his claims, a photograph of the mysterious manuscript, for example. However, in the preface to this sensational book, Notovich does explain why none were included. In the course of my travels, I took many curious photographs, but when I came to examine the negatives on my return to India, I was dismayed to find that they were absolutely destroyed, highly suspicious to say the least. Further damning evidence against Notovich was recently discovered in a contemporary report held in archives of the British Library, written by a Russian-speaking British official named Donald Mackenzie Wallace. After encountering the Russian traveller several times in Simla at the end of July 1887, Mackenzie Wallace claimed that on one occasion Notovich volunteered his services as a spy for the British government in India. Mackenzie Wallace declined, describing him as an unscrupulous adventurer. Despite these allegations of falsehood, Notovich stood firm, promising to return to the monastery and bring back the original manuscript. But nothing more was heard from him on the subject, and the claim of Jesus traveling to India is now regarded as a myth with no basis in fact. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John make up the four accepted Gospels of the Christian New Testament. In 2006, a new Gospel was unveiled by the National Geographic Society, one that focuses on the story of Judas Iscariot. The manuscript, which had been purchased from an antiquities dealer, was described as the most important archaeological discovery of the last century. After being lost for around 1700 years, the Gospel of Judas was recently restored, authenticated and translated. It has revealed some fascinating and controversial new information. However, there were stories of shady dealings in illicit antiquities that have been hushed up to ensure the rapid publication of the Gospel. Some evidence points to extremely worrying goings-on with newly discovered Judas Gospel, with some scholars maintaining that it should never have been purchased at all. The recently translated Gospel of Judas is a text which gives completely new insights into the relationship of Jesus and the infamous disciple who betrayed him. The Judas Gospel is an early Christian papyrus manuscript dating to around 200 AD, which includes the only known text of the Gospel of Judas. This Gospel gives a dramatically different view of the disciple whom, according to the Bible, betrayed Jesus. In fact, the new text portrays Judas as Jesus' favorite disciple and states that Jesus asked Judas to hand him over to the Romans for crucifixion in order to be liberated from his earthly body. The leather-bound manuscript was found in the 1970s in a cavern near El Minya, Egypt, and circulated among antiquities dealers in Egypt and Europe for years before it found its way to Long Island in the US, where in 2000 it was purchased by Frieda Nussberger Chakos, a Zurich-based antiquities dealer, for $300,000. She initially attempted to sell it to Yale, but the sale fell through due to concerns about the legal status of the document. She then sold it to a Cleveland area manuscript dealer who kept it in his freezer, selling off fragments when he could. However, when the dealer was unable to come up with the money to pay for the manuscript, Chakos recovered most of it, and in 2001 she sold it to Roberty, her attorney, for $1.5 million and a share of future profits. National Geographic purchased exclusive publication rights for the contents of the Lost Gospel for $1 million from a foundation run by Swiss attorney Mario Jean Roberti. The deal also gave Chakos a percentage of National Geographic's royalties from 2 books, a documentary and other profit from the publication of the Judas Gospel. The fact that Chakos and her attorney benefited from the financial relationship with National Geographic raised serious concern amongst archaeologists worldwide. Jane Waldbaum, president of the Archaeological Institute of America, expressed severe concern at the situation. "Nobody should be doing business with these people. You get down in the mud with these people and you legitimize them. You encourage not only the trade, but the looting that feeds the trade." A representative of National Geographic did admit at the time that the organization was informed that Chakos had been involved in legal troubles in Italy. However, they decided to proceed with the publication of the Gospel of Judas after finding no record of a conviction. Terry Garcia, Executive Vice President for Mission Programs at National Geographic, said of their decision, "We decided that on balance, yes, this is something we should do, and we feel comfortable about doing it. We had an opportunity to add an extra measure of certainty to make sure it was returned to Egypt, that it was authenticated, and that the best scholarly minds were involved." Nevertheless, further research, not carried out by National Geographic, who seem to have washed their hands, Pontius Pilate-like of the whole shady affair, dug up some disturbing evidence about Chakos. It was revealed that she was suspected of an involvement in antiquities trafficking going back many years and had received a suspended sentence in Italy 4 years previously for trafficking in looted antiquities. Paolo Ferri, the Italian prosecutor who led an investigation of the illicit trade for 10 years, said in the past she was at the center of the looting in Italy. Official records also show that Chakos, who goes by the name also of Frederic Marie Nussberger Chakos, as well as Frieda Chakos Nussberger, sold the Getty Museum fragments of 2 looted objects which Italian authorities requested be returned. The Getty returned a third item, a drinking cup known as the Onezimos Kilix, after its Greek painter, to Italy in 1999, after discovering that it had been looted from Cerveteri, an Etruscan necropolis north of Rome. Despite all this controversy, in a documentary which aired in the US in April 2006 and a related book, The Lost Gospel, Chakos is portrayed as an heroic figure who fought hard to save the deteriorating manuscript. "I think I was chosen by Judas to rehabilitate him," she said in the film. "I think the circumstance of this manuscript coming to me was predestined." On January 31st, 2007, a raid by the Greek police's art squad on a picturesque Greek beach village in between Beersheba and Thessaly. Looted ancient Greek and Egyptian objects were found and confiscated in the house, which was registered in the names of 2 brothers, both of whom were the nephews of Frieda Chakos. Research has shown that over the years, several of the cases of looted antiquities have been repatriated to Italy have involved the Chakos network. It has to be stressed, however, that despite the shady goings-on behind the scenes, no one questions the authenticity of the Judas Gospel. Rodelf Kassa, one of the world's leading Coptic scholars, was employed to reconstruct the manuscript and to transcribe and translate the text. In April 2006, at a news conference in Washington, D.C., the National Geographic Society announced the completion of the restoration and translation of the Judas manuscript. Apart from the Gospel of Judas, the 66-page manuscript also contains a text titled James, also known as First Apocalypse of James, a letter of Peter to Philip, and a fragment of the 4th text, which scholars have called the Book of Alongens. Understandably, the publication of the Gospel was of profound interest to biblical scholars all over the world. Bart Emran, chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, said that the new gospel has a completely different understanding of God, the world, Christ, salvation, human existence, not to mention Judas himself, then came to be embodied in the Christian creeds and canon. Herb Crosney, author of the 2007 book The Lost Gospel, The Quest for the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, has described how the Judas in the new Gospel of Judas is different from the one in the Bible. Judas is a different kind of character. He's the person who is asked to make the ultimate sacrifice, and that sacrifice is to sacrifice the life of Jesus in order that Jesus may attain eternity and immortality. And Judas is the one who enables all of us to help find that inner spark within ourselves. I think that the Gospel of Judas Iscariot is actually a very reverent document, coming from approximately the 2nd century, well after the 4 Gospels accepted as the canonical Gospels were actually written. We don't really know 100% that it is Judas's account. We know that a writer in the 2nd century told this story, which is the story of the encounter between Judas Iscariot and Jesus some time after the resurrection. Judas is the one who enables Jesus to fulfill his mission, to die and to release that inner spark within himself and within all of us that is divine. And that is the concept of this absolutely rare 2nd century document, which is just coming to light. However, a lot of scholars were not happy with the translation and noted the fact that the National Geographic, wanting exclusive rights to the manuscript, had asked its scholars to sign non-disclosure statements and not to discuss the text with other experts before publication. This goes against how the best scholarly translation works, where full-size photos of each page of a new manuscript are published before a translation, allowing experts all over the world to share information as they independently work through the text. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls, a significant amount of the original manuscript material from the find in El Minya is missing, though some of it is believed to be in circulation among antiquities dealers or in private hands, probably never to be seen again by scholars. There are serious questions to be asked of National Geographic, who seem to have ignored all scholarly protocol in order to be the first to publish such a sensational manuscript.